Chapter 1. The Hitch That Changed the World. Alright truckers. Let me ask you a simple question. What's that thing riding behind your tractor right now? Most of you would probably laugh and say, well, that's a semi-trailer, obviously. But have you ever stopped to wonder? Who came up with that thing in the first place? Who was the crazy guy that figured out how to turn a regular truck into a money-printing machine capable of hauling tons of freight across states, across countries, and eventually across the world? Tonight, we're rolling the clock back more than 100 years. Back to America in 1914. A time before endless lines of containers stretched across highways. Before supply chains. Before logistics became a billion-dollar industry. Before fleet owners lost sleep over fuel prices. And before truckers spent their nights listening to podcasts while chasing another delivery deadline. Back then, in a small blacksmith shop in Detroit, there was a man named August Fruehauf. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't some genius engineer. He wasn't a famous inventor. He was just a blue-collar guy. A grease-under-the-fingernails kind of guy. By day he hammered hot steel. By night he repaired wagons and horse carts, making a living one job at a time. His life would have probably stayed ordinary, just like millions of others, until one day, a customer walked through his shop door and brought along a request so ridiculous it sounded like something you'd hear at a truck stop after midnight. The customer was Frederick Sibley, a wealthy lumber businessman. He pointed at his shiny Ford Model T and said, "I want this thing to pull my boat." Now imagine hearing that in 1914. A tiny passenger car, pulling a massive 18-foot boat. That's like asking your warehouse clerk to shoulder carry a fully loaded 40-foot container. Most people would have laughed him right out of the building. But not August. He stared at the car, then at the boat, then at the pile of scrap metal sitting in the corner of his shop. And the gears in his head started turning. Back then there was no CAD software, no SolidWorks, no AI, no YouTube tutorials, just a sharp mind, calloused hands, and years of hard-earned shop experience. After days of tinkering and brainstorming, August teamed up with another craftsman named Otto Newman, and together they did something completely insane. They took an old horse wagon, stripped away the front axle, modified the frame, and attached it behind the Ford Model T using a primitive hitch mechanism. Simple, crude, ugly, but it worked. And just like that, the world's first semi-trailer was born. Nobody in that little workshop realized they had just changed transportation forever. Think about it. Before that moment, a vehicle could only carry whatever fit on its own frame. Once it was full, game over. But now, the vehicle could pull far more than it could ever carry. It was like giving a truck a second pair of arms, or giving a fleet owner extra revenue without buying another truck. Sibley was blown away. He loved the setup so much that he immediately ordered more units for his entire lumber fleet. The money started rolling in. Orders started piling up. And Fruehauf realized something important. He hadn't just built a trailer. He had stumbled onto a gold mine. But here's where the story gets hilarious. Because one man was absolutely furious. Henry Ford. Yep. The Henry Ford. The king of American automobiles. When Ford found out somebody had modified his precious Model T to haul a boat, he reportedly lost his mind. Legend has it he was so angry he voided the warranty on Sibley's car. Imagine buying a brand new truck today, then taking it straight to a custom shop for a wild performance upgrade. A week later the manufacturer calls you and says, "Congratulations, you're on your own now, buddy." But here's the funny part. The very thing that annoyed Henry Ford ended up becoming the future of freight transportation. History has a wicked sense of humor. Sometimes the thing people laugh at becomes the thing that changes everything. And sometimes the people who say, "That'll never work," end up watching everyone else get rich from it. 4 years later, in 1918, Fruehauf Trailer Company was officially founded. A tiny company, a tiny workshop, a simple idea, but one that was about to reshape highways, trucking, and logistics for generations to come. Nobody knew it yet, but the little blacksmith from Detroit was about to build one of the greatest trailer empires the world had ever seen. An empire that would dominate American highways, supply military operations, help launch the container revolution, and eventually become a household name in trucking. But here's the thing about every great empire: the higher it climbs, the harder the fall can be. So how did a humble blacksmith turn a crazy idea into a transportation giant? And how did that giant eventually become the king of the road? We'll get into that in the next chapter. If you're enjoying stories like this, stories about trucking history, legendary manufacturers, and the people who built this industry from the ground up, hit that subscribe button and ride along with us. Because the next time you're cruising down a dark highway at 2 a.m., chasing another load and another deadline, you might just see your trailer a little differently. Now buckle up, fire up that engine, check your mirrors, and let's keep rolling, because the Fruehauf story is just getting started. Part 2, the giant wakes up and the highways roar. You know something, truckers? Some inventions show up, then disappear. Some companies are born, then fade away. But every once in a while, a small idea grows, and grows, and grows, until it changes the entire world. That's exactly what happened with Fruehauf. After the first semi-trailer rolled out of that tiny Detroit workshop in 1914, orders started coming in faster than dispatch calls on a Monday morning. Lumber companies wanted them. Farmers wanted them. Freight operators wanted them. Everyone suddenly realized something very simple. If a truck can haul more behind it, it can earn more too. Or, in trucker language, one trip, double the paycheck. August Fruehauf saw what others didn't. He understood that he wasn't selling steel. He wasn't selling wheels. He wasn't even selling trailers. He was selling productivity. He was selling time. He was selling profit. And in business, those are the most valuable cargoes of all. So in 1918, Fruehauf Trailer Company officially opened its doors. And from that moment on, a quiet revolution began rolling down America's roads. America itself was changing. Roads were expanding. Cities were growing. Factories were booming. The automobile industry was exploding. Freight needed to move farther, faster, cheaper, in larger quantities. But there was a problem. Most trucks at the time were basically overworked pack mules. Whatever fit on the truck, that's all you could haul. Once the bed was full, game over. Meanwhile, Fruehauf looked at the entire problem differently. They asked one simple question. Why force a truck to carry everything? Why not let it pull? That question would eventually become one of the most famous slogans in transportation history. A horse can pull more than it can carry. So can a truck. Simple, elegant, brilliant. And it changed freight transportation forever. Because for thousands of years, human beings had always been limited by carrying capacity. Fruehauf helped unlock the power of pulling capacity. And that changed the economics of transportation overnight. As the Roaring '20s kicked into gear, Fruehauf wasn't sitting around celebrating. They weren't taking victory laps. They weren't acting like they'd already won. Instead, they kept asking questions. How do we haul more? How do we haul farther? How do we haul things nobody else can haul? And those questions led to innovation after innovation. Like fireworks exploding across the transportation industry. One of their first breakthroughs was milk trailers. Now that might not sound exciting today, but back then, it was a huge deal. Remember, there were no modern refrigeration systems, no GPS tracking, no cold chain logistics, no real-time monitoring. A spoiled load could wipe out a farmer's profits. A delayed shipment could ruin an entire business. Fruehauf developed enclosed trailers that protected cargo from weather, dust, and contamination. Farmers loved them. Dairies loved them. Customers loved them. And once again, the money started flowing. But the innovation that really cemented Fruehauf's reputation was something every trucker takes for granted today. Refrigerated trailers. Reefers. Cold storage trailers. The kings of temperature-controlled freight. Think about this. It's 1920, middle of summer. The sun is cooking everything in sight. A shipment of ice cream needs to travel hundreds of miles. No air conditioning. No modern refrigeration technology. No advanced insulation. Miss the delivery window by a few hours, and your cargo turns into milkshake soup. Customers were frustrated. Drivers were frustrated. Businesses were frustrated. Then Fruehauf stepped in. They saw the problem and solved it. Their insulated and refrigerated trailer designs help transport ice cream, dairy products, and perishables farther than ever before. Today, reefer trailers are everywhere. You'll see them at truck stops, distribution centers, ports, warehouses. But most people have no idea that some of the earliest innovations trace back to Fruehauf nearly a century ago. And they didn't stop there. Not even close. Fruehauf kept charging forward like a truck with a fresh turbocharger and a tailwind. They improved fifth wheel systems, trailer hitches, coupling mechanisms, connection systems, technical stuff, the kind of engineering details most people never think about. But those components are the heart and soul of the trucking industry. Without them, hooking up a trailer could require multiple workers, hours of labor, a whole lot of frustration, and more than a little swearing. Fruehauf helped streamline the process, making trailer connections safer, faster, and more efficient. Today, an experienced driver can hook a trailer in minutes. But behind those few minutes lies decades of engineering innovation. Then something incredible happened. Fruehauf stopped being just another company. It became an innovation machine, a steel empire. Patent after patent started piling up. 100 patents, then several hundred, then thousands, eventually surpassing 2,000 patents. An absolutely staggering number. Everything from trailer design, to coupling systems, to specialized transport equipment, to refrigeration technology. If freight moved, Fruehauf probably had a hand in it. If trucks operated, Fruehauf likely influenced the way they worked. Their fingerprints were everywhere. By the 1940s, the company had become a powerhouse. Massive factories operated around the clock. Production lines never slept. The sound of welders, press machines, steel cutters, riveting guns filled the air day and night. Detroit itself seemed powered by steel and ambition, and Fruehauf sat right at the center of it all. As revenue exploded, the company grew more aggressive. Like every successful empire throughout history, they expanded, acquired competitors, opened new facilities, entered new markets, bought companies, merged operations, built distribution networks, expanded internationally. Europe, South America, Asia, everywhere. Like a convoy of fully loaded rigs stretching beyond the horizon. The Fruehauf name kept rolling farther and farther. Then came 1956, a year that would help change global logistics forever. Containerization. Today, container shipping seems normal, but back then, it was revolutionary. Before containers, loading cargo was chaos. Every box handled individually. Every crate counted separately. Every shipment loaded and unloaded piece by piece. Slow, expensive, inefficient, a logistical nightmare. Then containers arrived, and suddenly freight could move faster than ever before. Fruehauf saw the future before most people did. They entered the container business, helping drive one of the greatest logistics revolutions in human history. A revolution we're still benefiting from today. But here's the truly scary part. It wasn't their factories. It wasn't their patents. It wasn't their revenue. It wasn't even their size. The scary part was this. Fruehauf had become the industry standard, the default choice, the name everyone trusted. Kind of like how people say, Google it, instead of search for it. Or how some folks call every tissue a Kleenex. In trucking during those years, the conversation often sounded like this. Need a trailer? Get a Fruehauf. Need heavy haul equipment? Get a Fruehauf. Growing your fleet? Get a Fruehauf. At that point, they weren't just selling trailers anymore. They were selling trust, reliability, reputation, confidence. And those things are worth more than steel. But history has a funny habit. Every empire eventually reaches a moment where the climb ends, and the winds at the top start blowing harder, much harder. In the next chapter, World War II will transform Fruehauf from the king of the highways into the steel backbone of the American war machine. Their trailers will haul tanks, missiles, military equipment, and the ambitions of a global superpower. But hidden beneath all that success, the first cracks in the empire are already beginning to form. And one day, those cracks will become fractures, then fault lines, and eventually, the beginning of a collapse nobody saw coming. Part 3. The steel backbone of war. You know something, truckers? Some trailers are built to haul freight. Some are built to haul profit. But a very few, are built to carry the fate of nations. And that's exactly what happened to Fruehauf during the darkest years of the 20th century. In 1939, World War II exploded across the globe. The world suddenly felt like a runaway rig barreling downhill with no brakes. Europe was on fire. Asia was on fire. Entire countries were being swallowed by war. Factories that once built cars started producing tanks. Steel mills turned out weapons instead of consumer goods. Shipyards worked around the clock. Ports never slept. And America, even before fully entering the war, was already preparing for something massive, something unprecedented. The gears of the war machine had started turning fast. And once they started turning, there was no stopping them. That's when military leaders discovered a simple truth. To win a war, you don't just need soldiers. You don't just need tanks. You don't just need airplanes. You need logistics. Sound familiar? Today, every transportation company says, logistics is the bloodstream of the economy. Back then, the US military learned exactly the same lesson. A tank is useless without fuel. A cannon is useless without ammunition. An army is useless without food. You can have the toughest soldiers on earth, but if supplies don't arrive, the war is already lost. And that's where Fruehauf entered the picture. As the war intensified, Fruehauf made a decision that shocked many people. The company shifted nearly all of its production capacity toward military support. Imagine that for a second. Picture a freight company making great money hauling commercial loads, then suddenly parking most of its regular business to serve a national emergency. That's essentially what Fruehauf did. It was a huge gamble, but they took it. Soon their factories became beasts. Lights stayed on 24 hours a day. Workers rotated through endless shifts. Day crews, night crews, weekend crews. Nobody stopped. Nobody slowed down. The sound of welding torches filled the air. Steel presses pounded endlessly. Cutting machines screamed through thick metal plates. Detroit itself seemed to pulse like a giant mechanical heart. And Fruehauf was one of the strongest heartbeats in the entire city. Then the military contracts started pouring in. At first it was fuel tank trailers, then cargo trailers, then mobile command centers, field hospitals, artillery transport trailers, heavy-duty military haulers, specialized support equipment. The orders kept getting bigger, and bigger, and bigger. Most people think a trailer is just something that follows behind a truck. But war proved otherwise. Sometimes a trailer can be more important than a weapon, because it carries the things that make weapons useful. Fuel, food, medical supplies, equipment, ammunition. Without transportation, none of it reaches the battlefield. Without transportation, victory never arrives. By the early 1940s, Fruehauf had become the largest supplier of tank trailers to the US military. And this wasn't some temporary title. They would maintain that position for decades. Think about what that means. In trucking, customers only trust their most valuable loads to carriers they truly believe in. The military is no different. And Fruehauf had earned that trust. Then came one of the biggest challenges in company history. The military needed a way to transport increasingly heavy tanks. And these weren't small machines. They were steel monsters. Massive. Brutal. Some weighed tens of tons. The problem was simple. Not every trailer could survive that kind of punishment. A weak frame could crack. An axle could fail. A suspension could collapse. And when you're hauling military equipment during wartime, failure isn't just expensive. It can be deadly. So the military turned to Fruehauf. Engineers went to work. Blueprints covered desks. Meetings stretched late into the night. Tests failed. Then failed again. Then failed again. But the team kept pushing. Because that's what innovators do. They don't quit when things get difficult. They keep turning wrenches until something works. Finally, success arrived. The result was the legendary M15 tank transporter. A 40-ton military trailer capable of hauling America's armored giants. Compared to ordinary trailers of the era, the M15 was an absolute beast. Like parking a heavy-haul rig beside a pickup truck. Different league, different mission, different level of engineering. The impact was enormous. The M15 allowed tanks to travel long distances without wearing out their tracks. It saved fuel, reduced maintenance, increased deployment speed, and in wartime, speed can mean everything. Sometimes arriving one day earlier changes the outcome of an entire battle. That's how important logistics can be. By the end of the war, Fruehauf had produced more than 125,000 military products. Read that number again. 125,000. That's not just manufacturing. That's industrial warfare. That's an entire company transforming into a military support machine. A steel empire operating at full throttle. And the money flowed in. Military contracts generated roughly $150 million during the war years. At the time, that was an astonishing amount of money. Adjusted for today's dollars, we're talking billions. Enough to make even the largest modern transportation companies stop and stare. But here's what made Fruehauf truly special. The company didn't fade away when the war ended. Many wartime manufacturers struggled once military contracts disappeared. Not Fruehauf. Instead of slowing down, they accelerated. Like a truck cresting the top of a mountain pass and finding an open highway ahead. The 1950s arrived. Then came the space age. Suddenly humanity wasn't just thinking about roads anymore. It was thinking about rockets, satellites, missiles, outer space, and somehow, Fruehauf found itself involved again. The United States was building missile systems such as Atlas, Titan, and Nike Hercules. These weren't ordinary machines. They were some of the most advanced technologies on Earth. And moving them required specialized transportation systems. The kind only a handful of companies could build. Fruehauf was one of them. Once again, the company became a trusted partner in projects considered critical to national security. Think about how incredible that journey was. A blacksmith repairing wagons in Detroit, eventually helping transport intercontinental missiles. The distance between those two worlds is almost impossible to imagine. Yet that's exactly what happened. By the 1960s, Fruehauf seemed to be everywhere. On highways, at ports, in military bases, in aerospace facilities, in container yards, in refrigerated freight operations, in fuel transportation, in heavy haul applications. Everywhere you looked, the company's influence was impossible to ignore. It felt as if the American economy itself was rolling on wheels designed by Fruehauf. And that's when the empire reached its peak. A height so impressive that many believed it would last forever. But history has a cruel habit. The moment an empire looks invincible, the first cracks often begin to appear. Not from competitors, not from customers, not from economic downturns, but from within. Deaths inside the founding family, leadership struggles, corporate executives who understood spreadsheets better than trucking, managers who knew numbers but didn't understand the road, and those cracks would eventually grow large enough to bring down one of the greatest names in transportation history. Because the next chapter isn't about growth, it's about decline. It's about how an empire built from steel, sweat, and innovation slowly lost its way, and how the king of the trailer industry began the long downhill ride toward disaster. Part 4. The betrayal in the boardroom and the truck with no brakes. You know what old school truckers like to say? A breakdown on the road isn't the scary part. The scary part is when the driver falls asleep at the wheel. A truck can have the biggest engine, the strongest frame, brand new tires, a full tank of fuel. But if the person behind the wheel loses focus, sooner or later that rig is headed for the ditch. And that's exactly what happened to Fruehauf. By the 1960s, Fruehauf was sitting on top of the world. They were the undisputed king of the trailer industry. Factories everywhere, thousands of patents, military contracts, international operations, billions in business. From the outside, the company looked unstoppable. Like one of those chrome-polished show trucks parked front and center at a trucking expo. Perfect, powerful, untouchable. But like many family-built businesses, the greatest danger wasn't outside the company. It was inside. August Fruehauf had passed away back in 1930, but his sons carried the company forward. Harvey Fruehauf, Harry Fruehauf, Roy Fruehauf. These weren't executives who learned trucking from spreadsheets. These were men who grew up around welding sparks, steel beams, grease-covered shop floors. They understood the business. They understood the product. They understood drivers. They understood customers. Most importantly, they understood why the company existed in the first place. But time catches everyone. One by one, the members of the founding family passed away. Like support beams being removed from a bridge. At first, nothing seemed different. Then the structure started to weaken. Imagine you've got 3 veteran drivers in your fleet. Guys who know every truck stop, every customer, every mountain pass, every shortcut. Then one day, all 3 retire. At the same time, what happens next? The replacements might have degrees, fancy resumes, impressive presentations, but they don't necessarily know the road. That's exactly what happened at Fruehauf. As the founders disappeared, professional managers began taking control. People who knew corporate finance, people who knew boardroom politics. But many of them had never lived the trucking business. At first, everything seemed fine. Orders were still coming in. Customers still trusted the brand. Factories were still producing trailers. The momentum of decades of success kept pushing the company forward. Like a loaded rig cruising at 70 miles per hour. Even if you take your foot off the accelerator, the truck keeps rolling for quite a while. But underneath the surface, problems were beginning to grow. Then came the 1970s, and with them came trouble. The oil crisis hit. Fuel prices exploded. The economy stumbled. Freight markets shifted. Customer expectations changed. Competition intensified. New companies entered the market. Faster companies, leaner companies, more flexible companies. Meanwhile, Fruehauf started suffering from a disease that has destroyed countless successful businesses. Arrogance. When a company wins for too long, it begins believing its own legend. We're too big to fail. Our customers will never leave. No competitor can touch us. Sound familiar? Kodak thought that. Nokia thought that. Many giants throughout history thought that. And eventually, Fruehauf thought it too. While competitors were improving production systems, reducing costs, developing new technologies, and responding to customer needs, Fruehauf was becoming slower, heavier, more bureaucratic. The organization grew increasingly complicated. More meetings, more committees, more approvals, more paperwork. Decisions that once took hours now took weeks. Some employees joked that buying a pen required enough signatures to launch a space mission. Funny? Maybe. Dangerous? Absolutely. Because bureaucracy is like rust. It grows slowly, but eventually it weakens everything. Then came the early 1980s, and with them arrived a storm. His name was Asher Edelman. If Wall Street were a truck stop parking lot, Edelman would be the guy walking around looking for expensive trucks whose owners forgot to lock the doors. He became famous for hostile takeovers, buying shares, building influence, taking control of companies. In trucker terms, he didn't need to buy the whole fleet. He just needed the keys. And Fruehauf became his next target. It was a tempting opportunity, a valuable brand, huge real estate holdings, massive factories, strong market recognition, tremendous hidden value. To a corporate raider, Fruehauf looked like a jackpot. In 1984, the battle began. Edelman moved to gain control. Fruehauf's leadership fought back. Investors panicked. Financial markets buzzed. Business newspapers couldn't stop talking about it. The entire corporate world was watching. It was one of the biggest business battles of the decade. Fruehauf faced two choices: negotiate or fight. They chose war. And years later, many experts would describe it as one of the most expensive victories in corporate history. To stop Edelman, management partnered with Merrill Lynch. Together they launched a leveraged buyout, an LBO. Now that sounds complicated, but here's the trucking version. Imagine your fleet is worth $100 million. To protect it from being taken over, you borrow $50 million. Then use your own fleet as collateral. Business goes well. You survive. Business slows down. The bank owns your trucks. That's essentially what an LBO is. And Fruehauf went all in. The transaction was enormous. Approximately $1.1 billion. At the time, that number was staggering. When the deal closed, management celebrated. They had defeated Edelman. The company was safe, or so they thought. But here's the problem. Some battles are won at such a high cost that they become defeats. Fruehauf had just shot itself in the foot with a weapon called debt. The loans immediately became a burden. Interest payments piled up. Financial pressure increased. Revenue that once funded innovation now went toward debt payments. Money that once built factories now serviced loans. Money that once created new products now disappeared into interest expenses. Month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year. The company wasn't working for growth anymore. It was working for its lenders. Management began losing sleep. Emergency meetings became routine. Financial reports stacked higher and higher. Consultants arrived. Bankers arrived. Lawyers arrived. Everyone had opinions. Nobody had miracles. The debt remained. The pressure remained. And the clock kept ticking. The most ironic part? In 1986, Fruehauf looked stronger than ever. More than 26,000 employees. Revenue exceeding $2.2 billion. From the outside, the company appeared unstoppable, like a shiny tractor trailer rolling proudly down the interstate. But inside, the engine was overheating. The warning lights were flashing, and nobody wanted to admit how serious the situation had become. An old trucker once said, "Sometimes the cleanest truck in the parking lot is the one closest to blowing an engine." Fruehauf had become that truck. Huge revenue, huge workforce, huge reputation, but a weakening financial heart. Then the unthinkable began. The company started selling assets, piece by piece, division by division, business unit by business unit. The empire began dismantling itself to stay alive. Imagine a fleet owner selling his newest trucks just to make loan payments, then selling more trucks the next month, then more the month after that. That's the kind of pain Fruehauf was experiencing. By 1989, the first bricks of the empire were already being removed. The foundation was beginning to crack. And what came next would be even worse, because the nightmare that had started with debt was now heading towards something far more devastating: bankruptcy. In the next chapter, we'll witness the darkest moment in Fruehauf's history. The day America's trailer king was broken apart, sold off piece by piece, and ultimately disappeared from the very country where it was born. The empire had survived wars, economic crises, competition, technological revolutions, but now, it was about to face an enemy it could not outrun: itself. Part 5. Ashes, Fire, and the Immortal Legacy of Steel. There's a hard truth in business. Not every company dies because it builds bad products. Not every business goes bankrupt because it loses customers. And not every empire falls because a competitor beats it. Sometimes, a company dies while it's still famous, still respected, still selling products, still employing thousands of people. And Fruehauf became one of those stories. After taking on massive debt to defend itself from Asher Edelman's takeover attempt, the bleeding began. At first it wasn't obvious. A division got sold. A subsidiary disappeared. A business unit was spun off. From the outside, nothing looked alarming. Most people barely noticed. But inside the company, something very different was happening. Fruehauf had started selling pieces of its own future just to survive the present. It's like a fleet owner selling his newest truck to make a bank payment, then selling another one next month, and another one after that. You stay alive, but every sale makes you weaker. Truckers know exactly how dangerous debt can be, not because the number is big, but because interest never sleeps. You wake up in the morning, and the meter is already running. You haven't turned a wheel. You haven't hauled a load. You haven't invoiced a customer. Yet somehow, you're already losing money. That's exactly where Fruehauf found itself. As the late 1980s rolled on, emergency meetings became routine. Executives searched desperately for solutions. Consultants filled conference rooms. Lawyers filled offices. Bankers filled the boardrooms. Everyone had a strategy. Everyone had a plan. Everyone had an opinion. But nobody had a miracle. And that's what the company needed. A miracle. Because every attempt to escape only pulled them deeper into the mud. Like a fully loaded tractor stuck in a muddy yard. The harder you hammer the throttle, the deeper the tires sink. Then came one of the most painful moments in company history. May 9, 1989. Fruehauf sold Kelsey Hayes. One of its most successful acquisitions. One of its strongest assets. One of its proudest achievements. Gone. Not because they wanted to sell it. Because they had to. They needed cash. And when you're drowning, you stop asking what you want to keep. You start asking what you can afford to lose. But that was only the beginning. Within days, more divisions were sold. Aerospace operations, marine businesses, trailer leasing operations, asset after asset, piece after piece. The empire that once bought companies was now becoming inventory itself. Imagine that. The hunter becoming the prey. The buyer becoming the seller. The giant becoming the liquidation sale. History can be brutally ironic. Yet despite all the sales, the debt remained. like a shadow that refused to disappear. No matter what they sold, no matter how hard they worked, no matter how many sacrifices they made, the burden stayed, following them everywhere, every quarter, every year, every decision. Then came the day that many people in the trucking industry still remember. October 7, 1996. The day the unthinkable became reality. Fruehauf filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Just a few words, a simple legal filing. But behind those words was the collapse of a legend, the fall of a giant, the end of a dream that had lasted more than 80 years. At the time of the filing, the company carried approximately $936 million in unsecured debt, a staggering number. One of America's most iconic manufacturing companies could no longer carry the weight of its obligations. The king of trailers had finally run out of road. If you've ever watched an old truck being hauled away to a scrapyard, you know the feeling. It's not just metal. It's memories. It's sweat. It's years of hard work. It's countless miles traveled. Fruehauf wasn't just a corporation. It was a piece of American industrial history. And now that history was being dismantled. In 1997, the breakup began. Factories were sold. Production lines were dismantled. Business units were auctioned off. The empire was carved into pieces. One buyer took one division. Another buyer took another. Wabash National acquired certain assets. Holland Hitch acquired others. More companies arrived. More deals were signed. More pieces disappeared. It was like watching a shipwreck being scavenged one section at a time. Everyone wanted a piece of the treasure. Nobody could save the ship. Then something happened that few people thought possible. The Fruehauf name largely disappeared from America. The very country where it had been born. The country where it had dominated highways. The country where millions of trailers had carried its badge. Gone. A remarkable ending. And a heartbreaking one. But here's the strange thing about legends. Sometimes they refuse to die. Because Fruehauf disappeared. Yet somehow, Fruehauf survived. Think about an old truck driver who finally retires. The man leaves the road. But his stories remain. His knowledge remains. His lessons remain. Young drivers still learn from what he taught. The same thing happened with Fruehauf. Its innovations never vanished. Its engineering ideas never vanished. Its trailer concepts never vanished. Its influence never vanished. The fifth wheel systems, the coupling designs, the transportation solutions, the manufacturing standards, they were all still there, still working, still moving freight, still shaping the industry. Every single day, millions of trailers around the world continue to use ideas that can trace their roots back to Fruehauf. Then something unexpected happened. The fire that everyone thought had been extinguished started burning again. But not in America. In France. The Fruehauf name survived. Quietly. Patiently. Like a glowing ember hidden beneath a pile of ashes. Still alive. Still waiting. Then in 2015, the Polish trailer giant Wilton saw value where others saw history. They invested. Restructured operations. Expanded production. Modernized facilities. And by 2017, they had fully acquired Fruehauf France. A new chapter began. Across the English Channel, a similar story unfolded. In 2021, MV Commercial acquired Fruehauf UK. Fresh investment arrived. Factories expanded. Production increased. New employees were hired. The brand found new life. Like restoring a classic truck. New engine. New paint. New technology. But the same soul. Then came another remarkable moment. October 2023. Industry publications once again featured the Fruehauf name. Not in bankruptcy stories. Not in history articles. Not as a cautionary tale. But as an example of revival. Nearly 3 decades after its collapse, people were talking about Fruehauf with respect again. And that says something powerful. Because maybe the real lesson of this story isn't success. And maybe it isn't failure either. Maybe the real lesson is legacy. August Fruehauf died in 1930. He never saw the empire reach its greatest heights. He never witnessed the billions in revenue. He never saw the military contracts. He never watched the company fall. But what he left behind was bigger than a corporation. Much bigger. He left behind an idea. If a truck can't carry enough, teach it to pull. If a problem exists, build a solution. If a market doesn't exist yet, create one. That mindset helped create the modern semi-trailer industry. That mindset helped transform global logistics. And that mindset continues to influence transportation today. So the next time you're behind the wheel, running another overnight load, fighting traffic, watching fuel prices climb, checking your mirrors every few minutes, trying to make your delivery appointment on time, take a look at the trailer behind you, because you're not just looking at equipment, you're looking at history, a history built from steel, sweat, innovation, risk, dreams, and the determination of a blacksmith from Detroit who looked at a problem over 100 years ago and decided to build something nobody had ever seen before. And if you enjoyed this journey through the rise, fall, and rebirth of one of trucking's greatest legends, make sure you subscribe and join us for more stories from the highways, factories, and boardrooms that shaped the transportation industry we know today. For now, take a moment, stretch your legs, check your airlines, look in your mirrors, and keep rolling, because somewhere out there, another great story is waiting at the next exit, and the road never really ends. It just keeps going, 1 mile at a time.